The year is 316 BC. A woman stands to be tried before a judge where she has no lawyer, nor a voice to defend herself. Once a queen, later a regent of part of one of the greatest empires in history, the mother of a legend, she now stands on trial where her fate was already decided long before a court could be created. In the end, she meets her death by stoning from the family members of her many victims with the approval of her political enemies. This woman is Queen Olympias, the Dowager Queen of Macedonia and mother of Alexander the Great. But who was she really? Who was the woman in the shadow of her legendary son? My name is Lorna Baker, and you are listening to All Things History, Episode 1 of this season, The Women Who Paved the Way. In this episode, we will be exploring the life of Olympias and how her place in history played a role in building her son's empire. Olympias was born in the year 375 BC with the name Myrtle, a Molossian princess and daughter of King Neoptolemus of Epirus, a kingdom of northwestern Greece bordering Macedonia. To this day, much that surrounds the childhood and early life of the young Myrtle has been shrouded in mystery. The identity of her mother is unknown. The kind of relationships she might have had with her siblings and family members is also unknown. Though, I find it's worth mentioning the possibility of the young Myrtle having had a close relationship with her father based on their shared belief and pride of their lineage. But of course, the true relationship between father and daughter is up for speculation. Whether the teachings of Olympias' ancestry was part of her education, having been brought up in the Epirus court, or a king's desire for his descendants to know the history of their bloodline. Either way, the sense of mysticism surrounding their lineage would hold an important place throughout Olympias' life. Based on documented accounts by the Molossians and the Greek historians, they describe King Neoptolemus having claimed, and what Olympias herself would also reinforce, was the belief that they were the descendants of Aeacus, a mythical king who was the grandfather of Achilles, the Greek hero of the Trojan War, the slayer of Hector himself. There was also the claim of their relation to Helenus of Troy, one of the sons of King Priam and Queen Hecuba, the seer who was said to have foretold the fall of Troy. While we know the city of Troy was a real city, with the German archaeologist Henrik Struman uncovering the city back in 1870, its existence does not guarantee that individuals like King Priam, Queen Hecuba, Hector, and Achilles were real individuals outside of myth. Therefore, the claims of Olympias' ancestry can neither be confirmed nor unconfirmed. Without further evidence, these claims are merely proclamations of her familiar ties with the mystic and serve for political propaganda. Whatever the case, this belief of belonging to a mystical lineage would likely have contributed to the characteristics accounted in Olympias in life as being passionate and imperious in nature. It was in 357 BC, at the age of 18, Olympias was married to the young Macedonian king, Philip II, as his fourth wife. Plutarch describes Philip II's first encounter on the island of Samothrace with the fiery redhead princess who would become the most formidable of his queens. After Philip had been initiated on Samothrace along with Olympias, he fell passionately in love with her, and although he was only a young adult and she was an orphan, he went right ahead and betrothed himself to her. With the death of King Neoptolemus I having occurred somewhere between 360 BC and 357 BC, Olympias had been a ward of her uncle Erebus, the new king of Epirus. With his approval of the match, an alliance born from the marriage between Philip II and Olympias was created. Though it's hard to truly know their personal thoughts and feelings surrounding the relationship. Like most women of the time, Olympias was a pawn in the power struggles of men, and was likely never consulted, nor given a choice on her marriage. Though Olympias, like many of the larger-than-life women in ancient history, made the most of her situation by manipulating the new political environment she found herself in to her own advantage. Despite Olympias being the fourth royal wife, Philip's polygamy including 3 more brides after their marriage, Olympias quickly proved herself as the true power in the royal household, with her power in the Macedonian court being second only to her husband. Her position was only strengthened and ensured in the following years of her marriage and after. In the summer of 356 BC, Olympias officially went from her name being Myrtle to declaring herself as Olympias, a way of honoring her husband's winning of the Olympic flat game races. Of course, this day is also when many assume Alexander the Great was born, so her change in name is more likely a declaration of her own achievement of birthing a male heir than anything to do with Philip II. One thing's for sure, from accounts by Plutarch and the appointed tutor for the young prince, the Greek philosopher Aristotle, Olympias genuinely believed Alexander hailed from divinity and swore that she wouldn't stop at making Alexander the next king of Macedonia. No, she was going to help him conquer the world. While this kind of vow certainly reveals the ambitions of Olympias' character as an individual committed to achieving her goals no matter the cost, I don't for 1 minute doubt her love or overbearing need to see her son succeed. In the world she lived in, one of 7 brides to her husband, no true fondness for herself as a foreigner with superstitious attitudes and practices in the Macedonian court, Alexander was probably and truly the only one Olympias could bring herself to trust and find love and acceptance. In her personal life, I think Olympias only had 2 things of great importance that gave her a sense of stability and balance within herself: her son and religion. Even before Olympias first arrived in Macedonia, cults with rituals and ceremonies dedicated to various gods and goddesses were present all throughout the Greek world. Considering Olympias' deep-rooted belief of her own ancestral ties with divinity and her own fascination with mysticism, it's no surprise she quickly became associated with these groups, particularly the cult of Dionysus, the god of wine, fertility, ecstasy, and madness. The account from Plutarch's Lives describes Olympias' participation. Olympias, who affected these divine possessions more zealously than other women, and carried out these divine inspirations in wilder fashion, used to provide the reveling companies with great tame serpents, which would often lift their heads from out of the ivy and the mystic winnowing baskets, or coil themselves about the wands and garlands of the women, thus terrifying the men. Olympias' skill for handling snakes was viewed with both awe and fear of what other skills she might own. She is often credited by today's historians for bringing the practice of snake handling into religious ceremonies in Macedonia. Yet this show of her more zealous passions, both the religious and private feelings Olympias could only express in ritual, was possibly one of the many factors which played in the division between her husband and herself. Plutarch claims it dulled the ardor of Philip's attention to his wife, so that the king ousted her, either because he feared that some spells and enchantments might be practiced upon him by her, or because he shrank from her embrace in the conviction that she was the partner of a superior being. Now, I believe anyone who has heard the legend surrounding Alexander the Great recalls the wedding night of his parents, where Philip II spied his new wife sleeping with a snake, which is said to have been the god Zeus in disguise, and how Philip was warned beforehand by the oracle of Delphi that he would lose his eye for his crime of spying. Coincidence? Up for speculation, but it would be really cool if it was possible. But whatever the case, the event still made him weary of what other depravities Olympias was capable of. Philip II might have held lust and perhaps admiration for Olympias's wild and fierce nature in the beginning, but even he feared what he struggled to understand or refused to understand. Hence, why fear turned to hate. Between Olympias and Philip, only one child, a daughter, Cleopatra of Macedonia, born somewhere around 355 BC and 354 BC, followed Alexander. Afterwards, only hatred and mutual disgust for one another came from their union. Philip II was assassinated in 336 BC, and Alexander took the throne as Alexander III of Macedonia. Despite Olympias herself having withdrawn herself to Epirus during the assassination, many still accused her of having planned the murder of her husband. After all, Philip II's final bride to a Macedonian woman named Cleopatra poised a threat to Alexander's ascension to the throne should she have a pure-blooded Macedonian boy. But even the daughter she had instead was just as dangerous in Olympias's eyes. Yes, there was motive for murder for Philip, no doubt, but without evidence, it could only come down as speculation. The deaths of Philip's final wife and daughter, on the other hand, historians, both ancient and modern, agree Olympias did command in the wake of her son's rise to power. Between 336 and 331 BC, Olympias served as an advisor for her son and remained in the Macedonian and Greek kingdoms to ensure no treachery while he was campaigning in Persia. She took this task upon herself in the beginning of Alexander's absence, despite not officially being named regent. But even with the Macedonian general, Antipater, appointed to rule in Alexander's stead, Olympias's power within Greece was near limitless. From various accounts in Greece, it's stated, Olympias seems to have had many supporters in Athens, having been noted by Hyperides in his speeches for donating to temples, sending associates and shopping trips to the great agora in Athens, as well as addressing the Athenian assembly through letters on several occasions. In 324 BC, Olympias had the capacity and the authority to send an embassy to Athens, demanding the extradition of Harpalos, Alexander's treasurer, who went rogue. Yes, her power was great, but not without challenges or opponents in the form of Antipater. It's said the conflict between them grew so great that by 324 BC, Olympias was ordered by Alexander to retreat to Epirus while his sister, Cleopatra, took over the reins Olympias had been holding as the king's mother and a royal representative in court. In 323 BC, at only 33 years old, Alexander the Great died of illness in Babylon. At the time of his death, Olympias was grieving in Epirus, with Alexander's half-brother, Philip III, having been placed on the Macedonian throne, and one of Alexander's Macedonian generals, Cassander, pushing for himself to be the new undisputed ruler of the empire. For the most part, Olympias had tried to keep a neutral stance in the succession crisis of her son's empire, given that Alexander never named his successor. Yet in 319 BC, a Macedonian general named Polycharon, having been ousted by Cassander as a regent of Greece, fled to Epirus with Olympias's daughter-in-law, Roxanne, a princess Alexander had married during his conquest of Persia, and her grandson, Alexander IV, with the intent of gaining her support in the name of her grandson. Olympias agreed to aid and serve as a guardian for her grandson. With the aid from her cousin, Astute of the king of Epirus, and what remained of Polycharon's army, they proceeded to invade Macedonia in 317 BC. Olympias showed no mercy, ordering the execution of the Macedonian boy king Alexander the Great's half-brother, Philip III, and the Macedonians loyal to Cassander, even, it is said, Cassander's brother. Yet the invasion, with the intent to place Alexander IV on the throne, was met with failure. Olympias was captured in Pydna in 316 BC by Cassander's forces. Her military support was crushed, her grandson and daughter-in-law also captured, and would meet a similar fate as she would in later years. Olympias was tried and executed by stoning in 316 BC by the many enemies she had made for herself over the years. Despite the many reluctances to murder the mother of Alexander the Great, Olympias was widely feared and hated for her ruthlessness and imperious nature. Yet, in the wake of her death, we now remember the incredible woman who was a force unto herself, with the heart of a conqueror and a warrior in her own right. After all, had it not been for Olympias and her influences, would Alexander the Great have been the man history knows him as? In short, I rather find it to be doubtful. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this episode and look forward to listening to more. Again, my name is Lorna Baker, and you are listening to All Things History.